Welcome, welcome. Good morning, good morning.
Good
Hello,
morning.
good morning.
Good morning.
Wonderful to see everyone. All these wonderful faces. Happy to see everyone today. Great as we see everyone hopping onto the screen here. Look at this. Hey, Jennifer, how are you?
I'm well. Beautiful day. Another day in paradise, right here in Arizona.
It is. It is. Yep. Beautiful, sunny Arizona. Tanya with us, Danielle, one of our newest members, Alexis. Got a couple of chaplains with us. Those are the folks in uniform, folks. Chaplain Melvin, I'm loving the new Army uniform. It looks like you guys are back in the 1940s. Love that. Looks great. I think all the pictures should be black and white, or those sepia tones, so it could look like you're really back in the 40s. Yeah, looks great. Love those uniforms. All right. Let's see, what time is it? All right, we're 2 minutes over. Hurry up, Thomas. Okay. So really appreciate everyone being here today. It's always a wonderful time for us to gather and be able to talk about some of the things that are going on. My name is Thomas Winkle. I am the director of the Arizona Coalition for Military Families, and I'm also a licensed professional counselor and former United States Marine. And
Hoorah.
Hurrah. And it's interesting. I think everyone's faith journey is kind of unique to their own. I know I've heard many people's faith journey. I think it's certainly a part of most of us in some way, shape, or form or another. It's something that I think is maybe at the heart of a lot of our lives, and it comes to us in so many different ways. So that's part of why we gather, really, is to keep ourselves reminded of what's going on in the faith community. The topic that we're going to be talking about today is moral injury. We've covered it from a couple of different vantage points. The subject is really fascinating to me. As a therapist, one of the things that I was doing while I'd worked in kind of hospital systems and residential treatment centers and all sorts of different things prior to doing what I do now with the coalition. But when I was doing that work, I started to receive a lot of the situations, a lot of the cases, if you will, especially in private practice, where the systems just hadn't quite worked. They had gone to a lot of residential treatments, or they had gone to a lot of had multiple hospitalizations, or they were kind of deemed what you would call treatment resistant. That's a term. It's an older term, I think, but it's a term that was used for folks that just couldn't kind of get in. They didn't get the right mix of things, and so we're struggling with finding their meaningfulness out of the therapeutic interventions that were being tried. And so I'd sit down with them for a while. And what was interesting is a lot of the veterans that I would work with, who were coming to me who had experienced post-traumatic stress, had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, especially coming out of the VA, and sometimes have been working with folks for years. Now, this is going back into the 90s, right? And the early aughts, when moral injury wasn't as much of a subject. They would come to me, or they'd be referred, and we'd get to talking. And the issues that they were dealing with, the anchor that was dragging behind them, that wasn't allowing them to succeed with some of the more traditional post-traumatic stress disorder treatments at the time, were moral injury related issues. And even at the time, I don't even think I was necessarily fully familiar with the concept, but there started to be these trends in the conversations that we were having that were much more spiritual in nature, much more soul oriented in nature, much more, what is my, if this can happen, where's God in all this, and if God doesn't exist, then what are we doing here? Or why did I go to fight? Or, why is it important that I love? All these like deep, really powerful questions. And if there is no love, then why should I live? I mean, these are really intense kinds of conversations. And these weren't people necessarily with, suicidal ideations or a desire to die. They were just having these deeply, uh, you know, deep conversations with themselves, and fortunately with me, to try to work through what they had witnessed that they felt was not right, not well, or that they had participated in that they couldn't believe was so out of character for them that they just couldn't understand. And so when we were able to talk through those things and work some of those things out and help them come to a deeper understanding, that that may not be them, that didn't have to define them and who they were and who they were going to be, but that they were still, um, you know, um, um, worthwhile and important, if not maybe to themselves, but to others or to their understanding of God, or to something higher than them. That they were then able to start understanding and starting to click with some of their post-traumatic stress disorder treatment, then they could start to see some progress, and then other things would kind of shift. In other words, the drag chain that they were carrying around with them, that was the moral injury, started to release, and they could start to work through some of the other trauma issues that they were experiencing. So I say all that to just say that this is not an uncommon experience that a lot of therapists had as they were starting to really have an understanding of moral injury. We started to bring in moral injury to the conversation in one of our conferences, I believe in 2012, 2013, to really kind of, introduce it strongly. It had certainly been kind of working its way in, but we wanted to really have a strong influence. So I look forward to the conversation that we're having today. Really appreciate each and every one of our guest speakers. An organization that has been just principal in everything that we've done is the Governor's Office of Youth, Faith, and Family, and we have the CEO, Tanya Hamilton. If you look at our originating pictures, uh, uh, starting in 2008, 2009, there is Tanya Hamilton. So
I was 21.
when she was 21, yep. And I was 33, something like that. And so I want to introduce CEO Hamilton to our mix today.
Thank
Fine.
you. Sure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Always a pleasure to be included and amongst these webinars and opportunity to listen and learn. Arizona Coalition of Military Families, veterans all throughout this state and nation has my sincere support. We're doing a lot in reference to talking not just to veterans, but constituents across the state. I have an opportunity to speak tomorrow with Pastor Sang Hoon has invited me to, what is it called? Creating communities of, I can't have my last word because I have chicken scratch writing, but I'll be speaking to an interfaith breakfast tomorrow. So it's always going to be nice to get out, get amongst folks and be able to talk about our services, our organization, and further the governor's priorities around an Arizona for everyone. So always nice to be here and learn. So I'm looking forward to the discussion and the presenters. Thank you, Thomas.
Hey, thanks, Tanya. Really appreciate it. Yeah, that should be a great one. That's fantastic.
It's belonging. You know that's
okay.
bad. Tomorrow it's called Creating Communities of Belonging.
Nice.
I need to learn how to write my B's and P's because it just was not looking right. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
You're welcome. Belonging. I mean, isn't that what it's about? Camaraderie, right? We talk about that all the time with veterans. I mean, that's a huge part. Isolation and feelings of isolation. That's what the Surgeon General was talking about in his report of last year. You know, he was talking about that is has a stronger effect. I think this is what it is. If I'm wrong on this, please someone correct me. But it has a stronger effect on one's health than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. Social isolation, being isolated. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, really. I hope I'm not misquoting that. If I am, we'll send out a note to correct that. But yes, it was an eye opener. So okay, all right. So thank you so much, Tanya. Next, I believe we have Heidi. I don't believe we have Tanya with us right now, so we'll flip over to Heidi. All right, Heidi. I'm gonna say take it away. What do you think of that?
Good morning. Thank you. I am Heidi Lindsay, and I am the project specialist for the Be Connected Faith Network. Thank you all so much for being here. We are so glad you're here to continue our discussion today. The agenda for today includes going over some updates on upcoming events, and we will hear from Mike Wald as he reviews the topic that we have covered in 2023, which was moral injury. This year, we really worked to continue our conversation, just as Thomas talked about, with a chaplain panel that will discuss the healing from moral injury and the most effective techniques they have seen that work. And finally, we'll have questions and a closing at the end, and you'll have time to put your questions in the chat or out loud, and we'll try to get those answered for you. Our upcoming events that are coming up here, the next newsletter is in the writing process, and we definitely want to include you. If you have an event in the Faith Network that you want advertised in that newsletter, please send it to me, Heidi at arizonacoalition.org by March 1st, and I'm happy to add it into our newsletter events. And our next faith gathering will actually be held at the 14th annual statewide symposium. The symposium is on April 17th and 18th. However, the actual faith gathering or the faith session with Mike Wald is held on April 17th. And Mike Wald is the track facilitator. So register today at arizonacoalition.org/symposium. Those sessions will include continued discussion on healing methodologies from moral injury, further than we discussed today, and therapeutic interventions for healing, and then a mindfulness session with Jamie Valderrama. That tends to be annual, as I understand it, so we would love you to join us. And now I will hand it on over to our Faith Network co-chair, Mike Wald. Mike?
Hey, Heidi, can I interrupt
yes.
you for a second?
Yes.
Mike, can I put you on hold for just one last second? Hey, I just wanted to, since we have Jennifer here, Jennifer, would you mind if I just put you on the spot a little bit? Since you're, you know, everybody's pretty awesome, but, you know, I just wanted to throw you into the mix if I might, and see if you'd be willing to just say hey to everybody.
Well, thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thanks,
Director of the Savahek Southern Arizona VA Healthcare Center.
Yeah, hi everyone. Jennifer Gutowski, Director of the Southern Arizona VA. Thank you so much. I just am so grateful that this community is connecting, and it's between, you know, active duty, VA, city, nonprofits, you know, religious institution, everyone just coming together. And I just think it's so powerful when we really come together as a community and care for our veterans. And I think that, you know, veterans really confide where they are seeking guidance and being spiritual. So I just think this is really wonderful to have a chance to bring all of us together and keep building that network. And I know, Thomas, you and your team are so good at doing this, just really creating this collaboration. I know Tonya Hamilton's an expert at it, and we loved hosting her at the VA because, again, it's about, we're all people taking care of people. And how do we stay connected? And like you said, Thomas, it's about feeling like you belong. When you feel like you belong somewhere, then you're able to speak up and say something and you feel safe. And that's what this is all about. So I'm really excited for today's session, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to say a few words. Back to you.
You're more than welcome, Jennifer. You always just bring such, good, positive, enthusiastic energy to everything. We just love having you. So it's
Thanks.
awesome. Really appreciate you. Yeah. All right. Well, and you made an excellent point. I do want to pass it over to Mike Wold. As you know, I think everybody's incredibly familiar with Mike. He is, really one of our champion superstars. I've known Mike now for a lot of years. I think probably 10 years. He first came to me and I was fortunate enough to have been introduced to him by a good man named Dean Pedrati, Phoenix fire captain, and holy mackerel. He was like, "Hey, what's going on here?" And I said, "Oh, a few things. Let's come check it out." And he did. And more importantly, he just started doing things, and that's just Mike's nature. And what I wanted to pass along is that we just love Mike, and Mike's going to share a little bit of news with you. He's going to share and kind of conduct this session as he always does. But I just wanted to give some nice words to my wonderful friend and co-chair as he's got some news to share with us all. Mike.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Thomas. And it's appropriate. I'm actually going to be moving on from being the co-chair with Thomas of the Faith Network. I've just been called to become the leader of the Military Veteran Ministry, Our Lady of Joy Catholic Church and Carefree, and I'm also involved in the Franciscan Renewal Center ministries. So I had to negotiate with my wife, and I had to drop something, but I'll still be there. This whole mission we've had to equip faith communities to be able to better support the service members, veterans, and families in our community has been an honor to me, and I will continue to be connected with the Be Connected programs. I also wanted to mention that Thomas was the vision behind the Faith Network. Early on in the beginning of the Arizona Coalition, Thomas understood from the beginning that faith and faith communities are important for the healing of veterans and service members and their families. And so it's been exciting to work with him, and I will be continued to be assisting wherever I can. Also, I wanted to, these events don't come on without quite a bit of background and work. I don't do any of it. I have a team, and I wanted to thank our team, Heidi Lindsay, Dee Person, Caesar Torres, Caesar Torres, and Thomas and Amanda Yanez. So I really appreciated their help. I wanted to, some of you are aware that the beloved Christine Martinez has passed away. And at this time, I'd like to have a slide put up on her beautiful picture. I'd like to dedicate our work today to her memory. She's a retired Navy Senior Chief Bosun Mate, would you believe? Navy people know what bosun mates do. They get some of the toughest jobs on the ship. I'm a Navy veteran myself. She passed away on February 11th, not coincidentally on the feast of Bernadette of Lourdes, who's one of her favorite saints. Those of you like me had the honor to know her are aware that after 22 years of service in the Navy, she dedicated the rest of her life to helping veterans. I couldn't list them all. We'd use the whole time for that. All I'll say is that her outstanding work. She was inducted into the Arizona Hall of Fame in 2022 and was selected, would you believe, as a Grand Marshal for the 2013 Veterans Day Parade. Christine, may you rest in peace.
Amen.
I know that most of you are quite familiar with moral injury, and but I thought I'd just do a quick review for those of you who might not be. I always like to make a distinction between PTSD and moral injury. So PTSD, you can read that, but I look at that as a trauma, a situation of trauma, which every human being, when faced with death, near death, watching death, seeing death, is affected. And I have to compliment Jennifer and the VA. You folks are doing a much better job than when I came back from Vietnam and on the Navy in 1970. And you're doing very good work. But moral injury is really, it's really what we call the soul wound. So I'll talk a little bit, if you have the next slide on that. So these are just, what's going on here. Thomas talked about it. I'm getting PTSD therapy. It seems to be working, but something is missing. I don't quite know what it is. Next one. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but Tim Ussett, who's actually on the panel today, gave a talk about, about 7 years ago at the symposium, and he brought up these things. It's you can just read those yourself, but it's this idea that I've kind of somehow, I don't feel right. I seem to have violated some of my basic spiritual beliefs. I'm not sure if I'm even worthy to go to church. I'm not sure if I'm, I don't know if I can be forgiven of this. I don't think I'll go to church anymore, that type of thing. So that's the moral injury, and that's what we're talking about today. Next one. This is one of my favorite slides. You notice that this is therapists have identified that some of the symptoms of PTSD moral injury are the same. You can see anger, depression, nightmares, etc. Some are somewhat different. But moral injury is characterized by grief, regret, shame, alienation, loss of purpose. So that's kind of a little Cliff Notes version of moral injury and how it's distinguished from PTSD. Next slide, please. So this is our panel. Victor, we got your slide in, but we got your picture, but we didn't get it onto the slide. Sorry about that. But our panel is it's Chaplain Chris Melvin. He's a recently new minted colonel. He's the head chaplain at the Arizona National Guard. Chaplain Father Conrad Targonsky, U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Navy captain, retired, assigned to the Marines the whole 30 years he was there. He's now the chaplain at Viterbo University. Chaplain Tim Ussett is a U.S. Army Reserve Major. Chaplain Joel Larson, Army vet, Phoenix VA Center. Chapter Victor Perez, and he's a captain, Arizona National Guard. So these will be the panelists that I'll be talking to. I'm going to start with Chaplain Melvin. He's out in DC. He's kind of waiting for a meeting that's coming up pretty quick, so I'm going to get him on first. Father Targonsky has to say Mass a little bit later in this, so we will let him be second. So if you could bring up the questions. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is ask each of the panelists to give an example from their experience of moral injury. And then we're asking them to, what have you found useful in counseling service members and veterans suffering from moral injury? And then how do you make service members comfortable talking about moral injury? It's difficult even to talk about PTSD, but even more difficult sometimes to talk about moral injury. So Chaplain Chris, we'll start out with you. We'll drop that slide so we can see everybody. Yep, are you still on, Creston?
I think we may have lost him. I had him spotlighted, ready
Oh.
to go, and he's not here now.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if there was a connection problem or what happened there. Sorry about that. But we'll see if hopefully he'll come back in. Okay, well, I guess we'll go to you, Father Targonsky.
Good morning, everybody. My mass time has been changed, so I'm free, so to speak. Yeah, the moral injury was always difficult for me to understand, and I made the distinction with it's a very familiar story of a combat situation. The Marine or sailor come under heavy fire, and after everything settles down, they realize there were casualties and children or civilians. They return home, and of course, all that surfaces, and they have this feeling of shame, guilt, and they maladapt, is that a good word? To a behavior because they're not a good person anymore. And with my fellow chaplains, I can concur that they come to the chaplain for spiritual guidance. Uh, Basically, very quickly, when I came back from the war from Fallujah and retired, I decided that would I would go on pilgrimage. I walked the Camino Santiago. I discovered something very, very important in that experience that I was processing, almost as if I was walking with others in this situation. So I returned. I'll be very quick here. I won't be that long, but I'm a Franciscan friar, and I follow Francis of Assisi, and I know his paradigm from the 13th century, that he was a prisoner of war. He came back from war, and it was very difficult for him to adjust to his family, to his church, and to life, basically. So what Francis basically does is he goes on pilgrimage and he identifies with the lowest of society in those days. Those are the lepers. And he begins a association with them, but also with nature. And I talked to some psychologists about this, and it's interesting because instead of going from within in isolation, he went out and had a brotherhood with all of creation, and especially for those who were marginalized. So I was thinking about that, and so what I suggested to some people, especially at the Casa in Phoenix, why don't we have a pilgrimage for veterans who are feeling this isolation, and let's just see what happens. So I think many of them were interested because everybody wants forgiveness. There's a certain feeling within me anyway for reparation. And how do we do this? I was surprised to see in my with history to see that Francis took a long time before he could actually feel he was forgiven. But he did it with pilgrimage, and then pilgrimage, I got a little more interested in it. It becomes what do they call that? A transformative journey to a sacred center. And spirituality of place became very important for people who struggle from the war. And so far, we've been doing this for 13 years. We don't do any evangelizing. There are many people who have no belief at all, but they come because they're fascinated with this Francis of Assisi. And many of us have in our bird baths. And I think when you look at his persona, he has an international appeal for striving for this holistic peace. That makes any sense. So that's, and when you asked about how do we make people comfortable, when they come and talk, I think basically I can walk along with them. Accessibility, availability, and listening. And we just introduce them to this paradigm of Francis. So it's the cosmos. We had a weekend reflection on this pilgrimage to Assisi last week at the Casa in Scottsdale there, and we had 25. We had a capacity. We had 8 on the waiting list. So apparently there is some kind of interest in Francis, And again, I think spirituality seems to be very important. And finally, I think what has also helped me was Ed Tick's book, War in the Soul, when he talks about people coming back from war, that our bodies come back before our souls. And the soul is the antennae, has the antennae of beauty. And I think we've lost that grasp through our shame and our guilt. And Francis seems to have captured it. So it's fascinating. And that's what we've been doing. I hope that they cover everything, Mike, or
Yes, when veterans or service members are struggling with being able to come up to talk about moral injury, what do you do to get them comfortable with it? Or do they ever become comfortable with it?
it takes time. They on their own terms. And I basically, it depends on this, on the person. It's listening. And I think there's a certain, you know, how they say the difference between advisors and mentors. The advisors had the information, but the mentors had the chemistry. For some reason, there's a chemistry that I seem to have with people who they feel comfortable. And I think we take it from from where they are. And that's how I began. So.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, by the way, Heidi just reminded me that if you have questions for Father Targonsky, please put them in the chat, and Heidi will be let me know what they are, and we'll get Father to answer them. By the way, Father, could you put your email into the chat, because Father Targonsky is leading a retreat for veterans, or should say pilgrimage to Assisi. That's coming in, what is that, in June or May and June, Father?
It's coming up May 23rd through May 31st.
Yeah, it's a
Usually
wonderful
Memorial Day.
experience. And the St. Francis retreat that he conducted last weekend was we convinced him to give us the Cliff Notes version, basically, of that 1 week experience, and he and some other people really did a good job. By the way, Chris Melvin has texted me. He's having trouble with connectivity. We'll
I think
see
I'm
if
back.
hopefully hey, are you back, Chris?
I'm using a different phone. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you. And did we get any questions for Father Targonsky?
Not yet.
Okay, well, they can come any throughout here. So Chaplain Chris, glad you're back on. So the two questions, first of all, provide a kind of a summary example of of a moral injury experience, that you've had to counsel on or whatever. And then what have you found useful in counseling them who are suffering from moral injury? And how do you make service members more comfortable with the sharing of their moral injury experience? But before I get to that, I want to mention that Chaplain Chris has a PhD, and I believe your dissertation related to moral injury, right, Chaplain Chris?
Very close. I have the baby PhD. It's a doctorate of ministries.
Yeah,
it's a little bit smaller than a PhD. It's not as quite as research intensive.
Oh, gotcha.
It's more practical.
At any rate,
yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
So it's all yours, brother.
So that a brief example, I've sat and data mined my own brain the last few days and struggled to come up with a counseling situation of my own. I was in New England and listened to Dr. Harris, Tim's colleague with the VA, and she described a scenario with a soldier at a gate at an entry control point who not only is considering a violation of their own code, but it's actually two moral codes juxtapositions against each other. Do I allow a child or a young person with a vest on to continue approaching and not take that child's life versus protecting the soldiers behind me or my service members behind me. And there's no good outcome in that. There are goods and there are bads completely, up and down the scales in that. So the other piece, the closest I could get from my memory banks was an ER doc who joined. I did some other work with this person. They had 4 combat deployments as an ER doc to get as close to the front line as possible and save soldiers' lives. And it'd be my assessment. Obviously, it's not clinical, but just listening to that doc's experience, the betrayal that they suffered underneath the hands of their individual leaders as they went up. By the time they got to the second and third deployments for that person, that sense of betrayal, I think, was what weaves the moral part of this and how we treat one another. You're forward doing, prosecuting moral good and trying to save soldiers' lives, and then you're not taken care of on the back end, or you're not provided top cover, and not cover like covering something up, but cover like you're not being cared for as a caregiver. That was a scenario I was thinking through. The second question, that's what
really,
have I found to be useful?
Yeah, what do you find, in counseling service members and veterans? What have you found useful in approaching that? I know Father Tagansky said it varies with every individual, and of course the relationship between the chaplain and the individual is critical, the trust.
Yeah.
But what would you like to say about that?
I might tip my hat here to Chaplain Perez, if he doesn't mind me outing him here. I did a part of the project with D-Min was walking through Chaplain Ussett's and Dr. Harris's curriculum, Building Spiritual Strength, there with the Franciscan Renewal Center. In the CASA ministry, we did 5 combat deployed chaplains. I think one of the biggest, and that was group work. So as an individual, I'll put this in 2 lanes. As an individual, I would say a lot of listening, exploration of the depths of their faith journey. Where are their pillars? Because what came up in the discussions, all I'll say is there was a willingness to discuss theodicy and the problem of, or otherwise known as a problem of evil. Again, this is from a more Christocentric Christian worldview from my own faith tradition, and then the ability to walk through lament. So talking and listening with individuals, there's a whole lot of actual listening, it seems, that has seemed to be helpful for me as I've counseled individuals. But then the ability to share that out loud in a group, to share laments. I don't know, but and if I may, Mike, can I kick that over to Vic? If you feel comfortable sharing anything with that.
You're a colonel, sir. I just do whatever you say I need to do. So, good morning to you out there. For those of you who don't know, I'm a battalion chaplain, and Chaplain Melvin is our state chaplain. So he's sort of like my grandfather in the faith here in Arizona, which is pretty awesome. But what I was thinking as you were talking, sir, was one of the ways that I found to be helpful to soldiers, and for that matter, just people in general. Somebody had hit on the topic of isolation earlier. And I think one of the things that moral injury does to us is it makes us feel alone, ashamed in the world. And what we do in those instances is we tend to hide ourselves from others. One of the things that I get to do as a chaplain is really enter into people's most sacred spaces and walk with them. And more often than not, it's not even necessarily the words that we use when we're with these individuals, but the fact that we continue to be present with them, which conveys their dignity and their worth and the fact that they're important. So just a little bit I wanted to add there, sir, would be, I think presence is powerful, presence in community. And if they're not going to, if they're not able, if they're not at a place yet where they're going to seek it out, it just feels good as human beings when people see us and they move toward us. So as a chaplain, I've found that as to be one of my privileges is I get a chance to move about the universe with my captain rank on and really get into people's sacred spaces. And it's a privilege. And I try to use that influence I have to just be present with them and let them know that they're not alone, that they are seen in the world. And sometimes that's half the battle. It's a lot easier to climb a mountain if you know somebody's right next to you.
Yeah, thanks, Vic.
Yeah.
Mike,
Thank you.
we're just doing the first two questions, or
Yeah, we're just, the other one was, making them comfortable, and we talked a little bit about that too, if you wanted to add anything, or Chaplain Perez like to answer anything to that.
yeah, I think what Vic mentioned there is that, and this is again borrowing from my faith tradition, it's the incarnational aspect of the, at least the Army and the military chaplaincy, is to be present. And yeah, how do I make a service member or veteran feel comfortable with sharing their moral injury experience? Yeah, I'm not sure what else to add there.
Okay. Well, I noticed there is a question that came in from Norberto, and so here's what it is. From perspective of chaplain, what is the best way to initiate a moral injury discussion with the veteran member over the phone specifically? And then there's a second question. Most of our direct service team members are not counselors or crisis professionals, but have an unmatched passion for helping our veterans. Religion, faith, politics can be hot topics to discuss as we attempt to connect clients with other services, and any insights would be helpful. So yeah, I can, Norberto's, there are a number what would I say, be connected people that are out in the regions, connecting veterans with the resources in those regions of the state. So I think that's where Norberto is coming from. So any comments on that from either, actually any three of you have talked. We'll be picking up the question a little further later too. So Chaplain Chris, what would you say about that? It's in, if you want to see it, you can look in the chat and see that question. And Chaplain Perez.
Yeah, let's see if I can get there.
Loganski.
I'll defer to Chaplain Turgansky first.
Thank you.
Basically, when I welcome someone who comes to see me, the first thing I always say is, how can I help? And if they bring up the idea of religion, spirituality, I comment on what they bring up. But again, I say the whole thing is atmosphere and kindness. And what do they say about mercy? Mercy is the willingness to enter into another person's chaos. If you want to take the time and just be all ears and feeling, that's a Franciscan approach. And like Chaplain Chris said, it's that incarnational approach to the human being and dignity and respect. And people can feel that, I think. But I think I just asked them, well, how can I help? Where we go? And invariably that gets things going.
Yeah, I would echo off of that from probably Kurgansky. And I have enough battery power to make it through this on my other phone. I think if the discussion opens up at all to any kind of PTS work that they've already done, just to ask them an open question on, are you familiar with this framework of moral injury? Have you heard of it? And that seems to open a new vista of discussion. It actually gets into how they relate to others, not just their individual, what's happening inside their brain, but how they're interacting with one another. With others, that they would perceive the shame coming from as it radiates out of themselves, to what Vic mentioned earlier, as far as the shame and the disconnection and isolation.
Okay. Thank you.
Briefly on this word initiate, Roberto, one of the things that we get to do as chaplains, one of the things we should always be doing as chaplains is planting seeds, so to speak. And by that, I guess another way to say that is we're always building rapport with people. One of the things, my experience in moral injury, is it's not going to be the first thing on the surface. And oftentimes a soldier may not even realize that they're struggling with moral injury compared to other things they got going on in their life. So oftentimes it's us being attentive and seeing the change in their disposition, because as a chaplain, I have 500-ish soldiers that I am assigned to love on and care for. And you really get to know these soldiers. And I think finding the variation in what they're presenting on a regular basis, and really just seeing the distinct differences and following those clues, those cues that they're giving you into those sacred spaces, if they'll allow you to. But a lot of that is predicated with the rapport building that we're doing as chaplains ahead of time, so that when those moments provide themselves or come to the surface, we're able to go there with them incarnationally, or the mercy that the Father is talking about there, to really enter into that space. I wouldn't say that we initiate full frontal on issues of moral injury. Usually we step very tenderly into those moments when the soldiers allow us to, if that makes sense. So always praying for the opportunity, but moral injury and PTSD, as you guys know, it's oftentimes a protected space in someone's life, and they don't let just anyone in there. So oftentimes it's them letting us in, whether they know it or not, and seeing those cues and following them in.
Thanks, Chaplain Victor. There are a couple of really good questions. We will get to those, but I wanted to start bringing in some of our other panelists with the questions we've talked about. I did put building spiritual strength. I put a link in there in the chat for those of you interested in that. It gives a good explanation. Again, Chaplain Tim Ussett was in the original research team along with Dr. Harris, and they're still doing wonderful work in this area. I'm proud to say that the Franciscan Renewal Center Veteran Ministry, called the CASA Veteran Ministry, with Linda McLeish, who hopefully is on the line, have brought that to Arizona. And you'll be able to see that on the website for the Franciscan Renewal Center, which is thecasa.org. They just had, so they do those periodically. Anyway, so why don't we go over Chaplain Tim? I guess maybe a quick example of moral injury from your perspective, and then what do you recommend and what do you do when you're counseling people with moral injury, and also how do you get them comfortable talking to you about it? So, Chaplain Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, hey, good to see many of you again, including Chaplain Melvin and Mike and Father Targonsky. I believe it was 8 years ago, actually, that I came down to the CASA, and yeah, it's fun to be here again. I would say I'll note there's construction going on outside the room I'm in, so if you hear noises, that's what that is. But what I would say in terms of examples of moral injury, I think others have shared some poignant enough examples, but what I would share rather than an example is more of a process example, is that so much of what we see around what we would call moral injury or potentially morally injurious event are situations where there are collisions value, ethical, moral system. So when we think about children that are weaponized, so if we think about driving a vehicle stateside and a child, a dog, another human it comes in the road, we stop, compared to driving in a convoy in another part of the world where part of your rules of engagement as standard operating procedures are we don't stop, because if we stop, we're ambushed, so to speak. So yeah, again, so if you follow the SOP and you're the theoretical driver in this convoy, and you run, hurt, kill over another human that's been weaponized in some way or didn't know what was going on, you've followed your rules of engagement, and yet you violated your sense of right, either personally, societally, religiously. And then what so often happens is that people then blame themselves and think, I'm unlovable, I'm unforgivable, I'm alone, as a way of processing these value collisions. And insert, make that a medic or a doctor, that it could be a military environment, it could be a healthcare environment where we know what we want to do to provide care to this injured civilian, and I know, this isn't me personally, but being them, I can provide care to this civilian post car accident, post burn, post IED blast, and then we send them out of here, and I know they're not going to get the follow-up care that they need. So again, it's those colliding value systems that sometimes overlap with what we would consider a life-threatening PTSD event, but they may not. And that's, Mike, you've already sort of talked about that. So in terms of what do we do in terms of helping service members and veterans, what I say is make meaning and integrate these sometimes awful but definite value collisions between their religion, morals, beliefs, rules of engagement, society, culture, whatever it happens to be. We try to again provide space in groups. In this case, building spiritual strength has already been mentioned. That's one of the interventions developed within VA that is, we would say, evidence-based, that has a couple randomized controlled trials behind it. And it's a structured group environment that chaplains or mental health professionals, ideally both, can facilitate together to really give people space to identify what their values and morals are, and their religious or spiritual beliefs, and how those beliefs might, in some cases, be part of the stress and the awfulness they're experiencing, particularly if they've withdrawn from the religious community or their belief system community, and help them find ways of using their belief system to integrate these perspectives and find healing. So if you're interested, one of the services we offer out of Maine VA is we offer a couple trainings on building spiritual strength every month. It's federal work product. All you have to do is show up on Microsoft Teams, and we'd be happy to train you and your team, whether you're chaplains or clergy, or whether you're mental health professionals, on one of there's several now interventions that we would call evidence-based. And I would say there are many interventions that aren't evidence-based in the sense that they aren't living this medicalized clinical world that veterans and service members find helpful, especially in terms of what Father Targonsky is talking about around pilgrimage, journeying together, different rituals. I know there's another program which actually, unfortunately, has had some problems, first relative to the pandemic and now relative to the conflict or war in Israel, and that was called Heroes to Heroes, and they would actually bring veterans on. I don't know if they would have used the term pilgrimages, but journeys to the Holy Land, where they go through a process together with other veterans, processing their difficult experiences, which isn't exactly what Father Targonsky is doing. They're different things, but they're similar in that they're groups of people journeying together in religious and spiritual places and processes, which are really important, and I think a lot of people find very helpful, because there is an element of what we saw in our studies, that what we would call it a spirituality group, is that veterans would say, I want to join the spirituality group. This isn't a mental health issue. This is a spiritual issue for so many veterans that come from a faith perspective. And being able to hold these groups out in community centers or at the CASA or other places, not that hospitals are bad. I still work for the VA. I'm still in the Army. It's not that those are bad places to get care, but sometimes people prefer receiving care in other places. And that's part of the importance of moral injury work, is really expanding the different ways, places, and means of providing space for healing, which does kind of tie into helping people feel safe, which I'm not a huge safety language person, mostly because I think this is really risky, dangerous work. To me, it isn't so much about helping people feel safe. Maybe I would say safe enough or willing to take a risk to revisit some really painful things, whether that's with me or with someone else. And sometimes there's benefits to working with people that look, talk, and act like you. And sometimes there's benefits to working with people that are very different than you. And sometimes we don't get a choice in that, depending on where we are. But that would kind of be my very brief help. I mean, help people feel safe, or I would say maybe being a trustworthy enough person, whatever that means in your context.
Okay, thanks, Chaplain Tim. Appreciate that. And I'm going to be. Oh, by the way, Chaplain Chaplain Targonsky and Chaplain Melvin may have to get off, so I want to thank them.
Yeah,
and thank all the chaplains for your wonderful messages that you're giving us. So I'm going to still hold on the questions in order to give a chance. We'll let Chaplain Joel come in and basically deal with the two questions, you know. I think we've seen a lot of examples of moral injury, so why don't we just jump into, you know, what do you recommend? What do you use in dealing with counseling service members and veterans on moral injury? And of course, I think Chaplain Tim put it right. You're never going to make somebody totally comfortable dealing with moral injury.
Yeah,
How do you make it safe enough to have a conversation? So thanks a lot, Chaplain Joel. Go ahead.
yeah. So I would tell you, I think the best way to make someone feel comfortable, well, you can't make anybody anything, but to help them feel comfortable is to hear. I think I saw something in the chat message is about being heard. And when we immediately jump to something where we're telling them, oh, well, you should do this, then they kind of go, well, you didn't hear what I said. And so I think that making sure people feel heard is really important to them feeling comfortable with talking to you. The second thing that I've found that I find helpful in talking with the veterans here at the Phoenix VA is that giving a name to what they're experiencing. Most veterans don't read psychological journals or chaplain journals, and so they've never heard of moral injury. And so when you start talking to them and they start expressing this guilt or the frustration and the disconnect in their morals and what they did, is giving a name to it. And when I've been able to give a name to what people are experiencing, a lot of times it's really interesting because they go, now I have something. And now I can understand, or at least I can look at something because now I have a name to what I'm experiencing. And I found that to be extremely helpful.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Again, so we'll move on. We had some good news. Chaplain Targonsky had his mass shifted to another time. Holy Spirit, jumped in and intervened. So he'll be with us. So he'll be able to deal with the questions at the end. So at any rate, Chaplain Victor, you had a little chance to talk, but what else would you like to say to us? What messages would you like to get across relative to approaches, for chaplains and to dealing with moral injury, and also, getting them to feel like, hey, I can talk to you about this.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity again, Mike. One of the things that's come to mind recently, and it's just something I'm exploring and personally, I read a book recently by a guy named Paul Miller, The Praying Life. And one of the things that stood out to me in this book was he talks about the discipline of prayer and how often many of us tend to struggle in the prayer life because we get overwhelmed and distracted pretty quickly. So the robust prayer opportunity that we're looking to engage in we lose that space pretty quickly because we start thinking about the day, and there's just something eating at us, and we just really can't focus on communicating with God, and we get frustrated and we tend to shut down our prayer time. And what he says in here, it was pretty insightful to me, and that is maybe those distractions, maybe those frustrations, maybe those things that are quote unquote keeping us from engaging in prayer are the very things that we need to be bringing to God's attention, right? Instead of cleaning ourselves up first and bringing a final polished up product. And one of the things that really struck me about that concept was this notion of, and again, from our faith tradition here, the concept of God as a father, and really thinking about myself at a dinner table conversation with one of my kids who may be sitting across the table from me, and I can tell that there's something really eating them up. And as a father, wanting to create that space for them to say, hey, what is it? I know you want to tell me that everything's fine. I know you feel more comfortable telling me that everything is fine and going well, but I'm just not seeing it in you. There's something about you today that's different. And as your loving father, that's what I want to talk to you about, because I care about your soul and I want to know what's eating you up. One of the ways that I found that we can get into that space is by being vulnerable with the people that we're serving. So if I could just get straight to the point, one of the things that I've been really trying to do recently is help my soldiers know that it is okay to be mad at God. It's very normal. God is the God who gave us our emotions. And oftentimes they don't want to engage in this spiritual conversation about moral injury because they don't want to offend God by being honest with God about where they're at. And one of the things that I found helpful as a chaplain, and I think all of you here that are caregivers, soul care providers, in whatever capacity you are, your story itself is valuable, because the letters after our names don't put us in a place where we're immune from life experiences. If anything, we need to use that position, that privilege that we've had to get the education and the additional training to say, you know, one of the coolest things I've learned about helping people in this capacity is to be honest with you about my own struggles. And I think once we open that door for soldiers or citizens, whoever we're interacting with, to know that, hey, even chaplain, are you saying you have bad days too? Chaplain, are you saying there was a period of your life where you were mad at God, where something that occurred in God's sovereignty didn't sit well with you? Yes, several times, right? And I think that's the best of who we are in caregiving, is that we can come alongside people with our own stories, not to hijack their pain, of course, but to say, you know what, in some small way, I get it too, because there was a time where I really raised my fist to the Lord and I said, you know what, if you exist, I'm not feeling that right now. If you exist and you love me, I'm feeling the exact opposite right now. Just like analogously we do to our own parents, you know, as we're growing up, like, you know what, you say you love me, but this that you're causing our family to do is telling me nothing but the exact opposite. I don't know how you're calling this a caring move, Dad. I don't know how you're calling this a demonstration of your love for me, Dad, because it just seems like you're being cold-hearted and distant. And I don't get that, right? So all that to say, sir, that one of the recent approaches I've really found a lot of success with soldiers is really being vulnerable and helping them to see that it is okay to start at a place of anger with God. And God, creating us with emotions, isn't going to be offended by our bad days, by our emotions, and quite honestly, about our anger toward Him. I think there's some freedom there.
Well, thank you, Chaplain Victor.
Hey, Mike, if you don't mind, could I kind of not respond but add to that real quick, and that the anger at God piece, and we frequently see this. Chaplain Melvin mentioned the betrayal experience of moral injury by authority figures, by leaders, by so many. It is that experience of betrayal by God. So some of the healing and reparative work is helping people restore their relationship with their God or higher power. So in a way, it can even be almost like couples work to help people process those feelings of doubt and anger and so on and so forth. So that's something we see really frequently. You all see frequently too, but it's well, I'm highlighting it, stomping my foot, I guess, so to speak.
Okay.
And may I jump
you.
in there as well, Mike?
Yeah.
I had to switch phones. I was out of battery juice.
Okay.
I would say to Tim, if I could add to that, even in a non-theistic framework for an individual, that sense of betrayal of themselves, against themselves, like they're now in a space where they feel like they're a monster than they ever thought they could be. And so whether that's a past iteration of them, who they thought they were, develop that couples work internally, you know, maybe, yeah, I don't want to use a pejorative word, but yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'll add this and then I'll stop adding things, Mike. But one thing that's important, particularly around forgiveness work of self or others and moral injury, is that it needs to be approached with quite a bit of nuance, because for some folks, self-blame is actually a coping strategy that if we take a theological approach to forgiveness, we might actually be reinforcing, in psychological terms, maladaptive coping, which isn't helpful, but it is when we think about our example of following SOP and not stopping the truck or the convoy, compared to harming an innocent human. On one hand, you could call, well, I've perpetrated, I've done wrong, but I haven't done wrong here. So if we take I'm a bad person at face value in its entirety, that isn't necessarily the most helpful thing to walk someone through it. It's really, again, this is our perspective, holding the tension and the nuance of that there was this awful thing, and yet it was still right by one hand and wrong by another. And I'll be done. Otherwise, I'll just keep going.
Oh, thank you, Chaplain Tim. By the way, it just reminded me, I asked Father Targancy to put his email in. If all the chaplains wouldn't mind doing that, I'm sure that there may be questions that come up afterwards, or questions about some of the things you talked about, the building spiritual strength, things like that, the Assisi pilgrimage, things like that. Well, let's get to the questions. I guess I'll ask Norberto, did we answer yours okay, or do you still have some question on you had asked about your team, how about faith, politics, etc., being difficult to bring up. Any more how was your question answered? Did you want to ask any more?
I think Bert had to hop off, but you did answer it before
okay.
he hopped off. So
they're working. Okay, good. Well, let's go to the next one. This is from Chuck Swedrock. And by the way, Chuck is going to be presenting at one of the sessions at the symposium. He's going to be on we have 3 sessions, and we have, believe it or not, the Building Spiritual Strength will be, Linda McLeish will be there. I'll be talking about the work I do for healing workshops through the Institute for Healing and Memories. And then Chuck is going to be talking in the next one. And then we have the third one is always good, it has to do with mindfulness. It's one we keep bringing back. But here's a question from Chuck. He says, there seems to be no reference to fear as such as death of self or others, problem of create safety for sharing if topic or experience related to that topic are not in the discussion. So did you want to have any more clarification of that, Chuck?
Thank you, Mike. I just put it in the chat what IANS means, if those aren't familiar with it. And the history of this, certainly for me, comes from that significant issue called death. I had a brother commit suicide about 40 years ago, and that led me on this path. And IANS has a lot to contribute to this. And what I heard in the discussion was mental health versus spiritual, which tends to, as I was at the retreat, 2 weeks ago in the Phoenix area, there were 9 chaplains there, and there could be a lot of discussion that we could do privately, but not in the open. And there were a couple of chaplains who had experiences who related to where I was coming from. So that's part of the discussion. And I think that the presentation to a chaplain's community from the IANS experience I have, that would be significant for helping the languaging, which is really the issue that we're talking about to a large degree here in my mind. You know, and I'll let it go with that unless there's more questions. I'll also put an email address in the chat so that if anybody wants to address a personal communication, you know, that's certainly welcome.
Okay. Now, thanks, Chuck. Appreciate that. Appreciate your attending the St. Francis retreat that was conducted by Father Targonski. Okay, Troy Parson, here's his question. I have found using logic like you are a good person tends to exasperate the person because they hear that you are not understanding them, but helping them to understand that thoughts and behaviors are a part of our being, but is not all comprehensive. Let's see, using diffusion for this. So Troy, do you want to say anything about that? And then we'll let the chaplains check in on it.
Mike, I think you might have left earlier.
Oh, okay. So did you want to say anything about that? This idea, it's trite. You're going to be okay. I mean, I've seen that with people on actually hurting. There's been a lot of death in my life in the last month, and people make mistakes, saying, "Don't worry about it, you know, get over it." A lot of trite comments instead of just, "And I feel your pain."
I found this about 10, 11 years ago when my mother passed away. People don't know what to say, and so I call them the pat phrases. You know, I'm going to pat you on the back while I tell you, you know, God works all things for good to those who follow him, or blah blah blah, or whatever. And it is, you're not hearing the pain. I'll put the "here" in quotes again. And that's really what I was talking about with getting people to discuss moral injury, is that you have to go beyond the trite phrases, the pat phrases, to allow them to know that you see their pain, you see their hurt, and it isn't just an intellectual, rational understanding. It's an emotional understanding of what they're experiencing.
Excellent, Joel. I think that the other chaplains would probably nod to that if you wanted to add to that at all.
Yeah, I was going to ask Mike, did somebody mention ACT or ACT and diffusion in that? Was that in the question, or did somebody mention that?
Which I didn't know what that was.
Yeah, acceptance commitment therapy.
Thank you.
It's values oriented, or has a values nexus to it, so it's helpful, I think, in these spaces, especially with moral injury, and just from a psychological perspective, there's a lot of blend. One of the catchphrases I remember from that is, you are not your thoughts, you are a person with thoughts.
Oh, okay.
And so if you can walk with a person until they can differentiate themselves from the thoughts or the feelings that they're having, and be able to identify those things, that's a part of the overall diffusion approach. And any of the other chaplains or therapists in the room can catch me on if I'm describing that accurately. That's my understanding of why ACT is helpful.
Okay, thank you.
One of the reasons it's helpful.
Okay. Well, good. Let's see if we have a question from Shay Sydney. Okay. One of the hardest things for a person suffering from moral injury is to discuss the topic with someone that they feel might judge them or not understand why they didn't feel they had a choice. When we leave active service, we lose access to the military chaplains who are our unbiased, non-judgmental ear with protection of 100% confidentiality. Does Arizona have a way that veterans and retirees can make contact with a chaplain to open that box in what they might consider safe environment? Well, just a quick comment, you know, we have the VA chaplains like Chaplain Joel, but I'd open it up to this, Joel, you probably, you know, whether probably those that aren't in the military probably, well, I don't know that, Chris and Victor, can they have access to you folks, or would they be working primarily with folks like Joel to get that kind of connection? So Joel, I guess we'll start with you. How would a veteran get access to a chaplain?
I mean, they can stop by the office down here. We visit every patient that gets that comes into the hospital. We try and see them within 48 hours. And so for as far as veterans, if you're going to one of the VA facilities, one in Tucson, one in Phoenix, one in Prescott, if you're just doing outpatient, you can actually ask your provider to put in a consult. We're working on, we don't have it fully facilitated, but working on telehealth for chaplaincy. And right now we're kind of making phone calls, but there is access at least to the VA chaplains. I'm not sure if they can contact somebody. Probably retirees can probably contact somebody at one of the installations, Luke, Yuma, Davis Monthan, Fort Huachuca. But I don't know about Guard Reserve and how they would go about doing that after they've left.
Mm-hmm. Tim, you're a reserve. What questions? Are reserve chaplains restricted simply to people in the soldiers in the reserve, or what would you say?
Well, that's a restricted wouldn't be probably the right term, as much as we wouldn't have the bandwidth, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be that if someone reached out to me, I wouldn't say, no, I'm never talking to you. It'd be like, okay, well, let's try to get you connected with probably a VA chaplain, or a chaplain more closely aligned with, if they're still in a reserve or guard unit that maybe doesn't have a chaplain, whatever the specific situation is. We would try to get them, handed off, because we would want to ensure they get care and they're able to, seek the support that they're wanting, while also we recognize, like in my case, I'm in legal command on the Army Reserve side. We have we technically 3, but we're going to be down to 2 chaplains for almost 1,800 people in 43 states. Yeah. So we're not overflowing with resources to be able to support significant other efforts outside of our formation, so to speak.
Oh, thank you, Tim. It's one of the goals of the Faith Network is to educate pastors to be able to really partner with mental health professionals. And so a lot of our training on moral injury there is geared towards pastors and people that are, they're not chaplains. So we're trying to get to the point where that resource that you folks provide as chaplains is spread out to as many faith communities as possible. And so that's kind of why we're trying to educate. There are no doubt people in faith communities, and clergy, et cetera, that are listening even now. And there are a lot more that can get access on the Faith Network that will watch this video. So we're trying to get to that point where they can be a resource for the veterans.
Mike, one brief thing to add, I put it in the chat, but we partnered with several VAs. We have a proposal under consideration that we'll probably find out in the next 4 to 6 months if it was funded, but it was a rather ambitious proposal to look at greater chaplaincy integration within Department of Veterans Affairs within outpatient primary care and mental health. So that if there's potentially promising results from that study, that could help resource or support additional chaplain hiring to more explicitly serve outpatient settings in VA.
Excellent.
So that,
And with what Joe said about telehealth and things, spreading that out into the rural areas, et cetera, would be great. The next one is from Dorothy Thompson. It says, how can area religious groups best help local veterans and even active service men and women with recovery from moral injury? Is it best to have social activities to build a relationship so that they can feel the group is a safe place to share needs or concerns? Well, one thing, of course, I'd recommend that they attend the Building Spiritual Strength, and also even the St. Francis retreat and our Healing and Memories retreats also. I'll give you some information on that, are focused on moral injury. But I'd like to be, or maybe I'll ask Joel that question, because you're probably, might have more access than the other chaplains that are in different areas. So go ahead, Joel. What do you think about that question?
I think that the first thing I would do, and this may sound trite, but get them connected to be connected. Nobody can be an expert in everything. And I think that oftentimes, the local church in America is about 80 people, and they may have one staff person there. They may, and so you can't be an expert on everything. And so finding those resources, the BSS, CASA, chaplains at the VA, to access, I think would be really important, and trying not to do it all yourself. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that it's difficult for one person to know everything.
Yeah, the Be Connected program is founded on, or should say, focuses on the social determinants of health. Spirituality is one of those. So the Be Connected people that would I'll put the number in, but the Be Connected line, you can call into that, and they will get you connected as best as possible with training and things like that. Also, you'll hear about some training coming up too that's related to the Be Connected program. So maybe I could ask Heidi to put the Be Connected link in there along with the phone number, so that people could call that. See, we've got about just a couple minutes left here. Let me see.
Can I hop in real quick, Mike?
Yes.
Victor had a question for our group, and I wanted to give him a quick second to present that.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. Appreciate that. So one of the things I get to do on the full-time side, guys, is I work with a local law enforcement agency. I've been a police officer about 17 years. And one of the exciting parts of law enforcement right now is we're trying our best to catch up with the holistic approach, which you guys are modeling here. One of the things I'm wondering is, amongst you guys here, I see different titles, different organizations. What we'd be looking for basically as an extension of you guys, because on our team in particular, our chief has built what's called the crisis response team, and we respond to as many of the mental illness calls for service. Anytime veteran is mentioned in a call for service, our team is going to try to jump on that, because we have a couple of us on the team that are veterans. We've become known, unfortunately, as the suicide squad. Anytime there's a suicide ideation call or whatnot, or veteran in crisis, typically patrol officers will defer to us pretty quickly to get out there and try to de-escalate and connect with the person in crisis. We're only as strong, though, as the resources that we're connected to. So I guess what I'm asking, Heidi, in this group is just generally speaking, and if you guys want to hit me up offline or send me your information, what I'm always looking for, consider me an extension of you guys and the work that you do. Like, I'm the one that gets to go to the 911 calls and meet the person that's in crisis. But as Joel was saying, it's impossible for me to solve everybody's problem. What I like to consider myself is the conduit of resources for this person in crisis, and to be able to connect them in that moment in crisis. A lot of times cards don't work at this time, or call somebody next Monday to get an appointment kind of thing. Those don't work a lot of times. So what I'm wondering is if there's some people in here that are trying to build a better liaison relationship with law enforcement that would maybe be willing to give me some of your information because it's a new team, we're literally in the process of working out what these relationships can look like. But if you want to consider me boots on ground, literally speaking, for a lot of the work that you guys are doing, I'm happy to explore what that relationship might look like and being better able to help you guys help citizens in crisis. And just so you know, once it becomes popular with one law enforcement agency, it's going to spread like wildfire. So the more that we are better versed in what ACMF does, what Be Connected does, other agencies are going to wonder, how are you dealing so well with veterans in crisis? How are you dealing so well with the suicide stuff that's going on? And we'll say, hey, well, we have really good friends that have taught us how to do this work. And let me get you in touch with the person I know from Be Connected or ACMF or Chaplain Joel over at the VA Center at the Veterans Hospital. So we're only as strong as we have you guys in our back pockets, Heidi. So I guess that's the spirit of my question. If that sounds like something you'd like to partner with me on, then I'm just looking for a way to get in touch with those here that would want to do that. Mike, I know that's well beyond the purpose of this meeting. I know I'm being a little selfish right now, but if you could send me your information, guys, or if there's a way I could connect with you guys outside of this, that would be amazing.
No, that's great. And again, that's what we learn in the military, to take advantage of the situation, right?
Right.
The plan is
Right.
in, and then we have our workarounds. Anyway, in honor of everybody's time, first of all,
I put a link
Dee
for
had
you
a
in-
comment. Sorry.
oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
Chuck.
I put a link for you, Victor, in the chat.
And Dee had a comment too in response to
Yeah,
Victor.
and I think we've got, did all the chaplains get their emails into the chat? Yeah.
And could I say something?
Yep.
Yes, actually leading the way home is a ministry that is working in mental health coaching for military, veterans, and first responders. And I'm trying to duplicate my efforts.
Excellent. So, did you want to put something in the chat so we can continue to connect?
Unfortunately, I am in a vehicle, so I can't
Okay.
type.
Well, maybe what we could do is give us your, Heidi, maybe you could enter his email address. So you could just give it to us verbally.
Okay, it's BK Hayes, HAYES, at LTWH.org.
No, repeat that, Heidi.
BK.
We have B.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. BKHAYES at LTWH.org.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, again, I wanted to thank our chaplains, and I really think, you know, the video has been recorded. This will go out to over 500 people on our distribution list. We usually get a lot of hits on the videos. I want to thank those who have attended also, and turn it over to our next slide, I guess.
Can we have 1 second? Can we let Dee respond
Oh, sure.
to Victor? Thank you.
Yes, good morning. I know we're going to get out of here. We're almost done, ladies and gentlemen. This has been a great presentation, great discussion. I just want to follow up, Victor, to let you know that that is the work that is being done right now behind the scenes. Just so everyone's aware, we have been selected to do a suicide prevention certification. We're in the midst of creating a pilot program that will be statewide. So we'll be working with first responders, the education system, really Department of Health. So really, again, this collaborative effort, and that's what's great about the work we do here, team. It won't be one person or one organization siloing. It'll be inclusive. And so I look forward to having updates in a few months, Victor, so that we can work on this together, one team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dee. And Dee is the head of the entire Be Connected program. We didn't talk much about that, but that's unique to Arizona. It provides resources to serve veterans in all the dimensions of the social determinants of health. And the number that Heidi put in is the number to call for assistance, 8 to 5 any day. I've called it 20 times in the last 6 months.
Nice.
I've gotten all kinds of good response. So I'll turn it over. I guess it back to you, Heidi.
Yes, thank you. Couldn't find myself there.
Yeah.
All right. Give me 1 second to remove a couple of spotlights here. Okay, thank you for your patience. Okay, so thank you all so much. What a fantastic discussion. Amanda Yanez and I were typing away behind the scenes saying, wow, this is so powerful today. This was a fantastic faith gathering. So thank you all for joining. Our upcoming events for 2024, like I mentioned, our next faith gathering will actually be at our statewide symposium in April. It's held on April 17th and 18th, but the faith and spirituality track is on the 17th. We hope to see you there. Go to arizonacoalition.org/symposium to get registered. We also have faith gatherings like this on Zoom, August 14th and November 13th in 2024. And we have a trauma-informed navigator training for faith-based organizations that Tanya was talking about at the beginning on February 29th. So I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you for our panel of chaplains. That was so educational and so impactful as we took our discussion further this month in 2023, discussing moral injury and now talking about healing. Thank you to Director Thomas Winkle and Director Tanya Hamilton for joining us today and doing our welcome. And thank you for all of you on this call who are doing the work to impact service members, veterans, and their families. We see and appreciate your continued effort and collaboration as we work together to have a lasting impact in Arizona and across the country. Have a great day.
Thank you.